Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? No luck.
What happens when you come back from break?
And everything's turned off.
And it's like, "Ah, how do we do this? It's like you have to.
Maybe.
That's awesome.
That means we can blame you.
Let's do it one more time.
Hello? All right, we're in business. Good afternoon and welcome to the Redevelopment Agency meeting for July 10th, 2018. We're going to go ahead and kick this meeting off, starting with general comments to the Board of Directors. I've got a number of comment cards here. If you haven't had a chance to fill one of these light green cards out, you can take one right now and hand it to a staff member. Just by way of a reminder, this is a public comment period for our full agenda. So if you'd like to speak about any item on our agenda, now is your chance. So we're going to kick it off with Janie Iwamoto, and you have 2 minutes, followed by Raymond Uno, Judge Uno.
Okay, I'm going to try to go fast, but I want to give a little bit of background because many of you have heard about the background of Japantown, but we are repeating history in a lot of ways, unfortunately, now in the present day with the border, no due process, and that's particularly eerily familiar to the Japanese community, what happened with no due process and we're incarcerated. The Japanese community has been here over 100 years in the area that we are talking about. The Salt Palace destroyed the thriving Japantown. They were told that it would be the Salt Palace would be put where the county building is now, but it wasn't. And then the later expansion caused the community to be the back door again of the Salt Palace Hotel. Then the Convention Hotel was another issue. They said they're moving it away from Block 67, but now we'll hear in the in the rezone hearing that it's actually, they want to do a convention-style hotel there too. And this incident, we were contacted early on about trying to sell our property or alcohol, and that's all that we were given. And so we didn't have a seat at the table. So each time something happens, it negatively has impacted the community. But we've survived, and we will fight to survive. It's not just our community anymore. It's the Kachins and the Polynesians who share our church. It's the Asian Association of Utah. So now I want to get to the present, and I just want to say that the bottom line, the inclusion of this internal street that this is with this development is not at mid-blocks. And so it diminishes the planning fabric of the streets that are existing and turns the buildings inward and turns their backs on the streets of the city that need to be strengthened visually. So the Ritchie Group's master plan of the block is detrimental to the whole notion of urban planning for Salt Lake City. And also the parking, and I know they had to design this building for the 300-foot rule for the alcohol, but the parking, I just want to say, is on, we had asked, and we've been meeting with the city and county on this, that they come in through 3rd West instead of right in front of our church where the garbage and all that would come in on 3rd West and leave on their property, and that would obviate a lot of the problems that we have. So please don't make this about money, about high density. We're using public funds, and we love the opportunity to direct this. It's a golden opportunity to direct this development in the right way.
Thank you very much. I encourage you to send your comments to the full body if you don't mind.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Up next, Judge Uno, followed by George Chapman.
Time in the morning and I don't change, so I hope you'll excuse me. But I've been involved in this for quite a while. My uncle was one of the founders of the church, and then my mother moved to Salt Lake from Ogden, and she continued to be on there. And one of the things that I have experienced is that I've seen this dispersal of the Japanese community because of the destruction of Japantown. And this is not only in Salt Lake, but it's in California too, and because of the evacuation of the Japanese during the war, every Japantown was destroyed or lost, and so these people had to go back and rebuild it. We didn't do Japantown here. We lost all the populous one here, and so I feel out of place since I see all you young and aggressive and bright people, and it's hard to compete with all you built into something that, you know, the Japanese community is something that I think Salt Lake City should take into consideration, because diversity in this city, I found out, is very small in regards, particularly the Asian community. And the Japanese community, I think, is one diamond that you could probably polish and you know, restore if possible. So I encourage you to do everything you can to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Uno. Followed, Judge Uno, we have George Chapman, and that is the last card I have today for public comment period.
Okay. Let's talk about the $15 million you're considering giving to the Ritchie Group. Ritchie Group is actually a pretty good developer, a good reputation, but you're talking about giving $15 million for one level of public parking. At the same time, you discourage public parking lots downtown. You actually stopped Vasilius Priscos and several of his properties from turning into parking lots. This is like an insult to developers and Vasilius Priscos, because if he can't do a parking lot downtown for free, you're giving $15 million to Ritchie Group for a public level parking lot. You should not do this until you redo your demolition ordinance and consider whether or not you really do have enough parking downtown or not, because you're actually discouraging everybody from doing parking lots downtown. And at the same time, oh my gosh, you're giving $15 million to somebody to do a parking lot underground. Last time you did this, you actually ruined walkability in Sugar House. You increased air pollution, and you destroyed, the librarians had to park in an unsafe area. The Meacham building, the View, when you gave him $7 million, he ended up $10 minimum parking charge, which resulted in every other parking lot around the area putting in a 2-hour maximum. So you can't just park and walk around for 4 or 5 hours in Sugar House anymore. That's how bad it is. Air pollution increase, that's something Salt Lake City did. So I'm asking you not to do $15 million to the Ritchie Group, a great company, because Salt Lake City needs a better demolition ordinance. Salt Lake City needs to get their act together regarding parking lots. And you need to find out how to make sure any money you give for a parking lot isn't misused by developers and on the backs of taxpayers and businesses in the area. Does that make sense? And I hope you go to 3 minutes, because these are important issues. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, George. I received a new comment card for Brent Koga.
Hi, this is going to be very impromptu. I'm a member of the Salt Lake Buddhist Temple. I'd like to invite all of you. They're having their annual Obon Festival this Saturday. It's a community event. It's open to the public. They'll completely close down First South. We'll have thousands of people. It's a festival to honor your ancestors. And so we don't want, and also from the Japanese Church of Christ on the other corner, they invite you to their 100-year celebration on August 25th. So the community's been there, the two churches have been there for over 100 years. In 2012, I think the Salt Lake Buddhist Temple celebrated their 100 years. My concern is I'm all for development, but my concern is the development overruns the voices of the two longstanding churches, and I just don't want it to get drowned out. If you put in apartments that have potentially 500 or 600 apartments, and we close down the streets, the two churches will close down the streets maybe 3 or 4 times a year, so you're going to have 1,500 or 2,000 residents there complaining against two church entities and our voices will get drowned out by those 1,500 or 2,000 residents, where you've had 2 community churches there that have been represented there for over 100 years, and I just don't want to see those voices get drowned out. Doesn't make any sense when they play an active role in the community to have money over the representation of the 2 communities. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Koga. Final call. Anybody in the audience, if you'd like to speak, now is your opportunity. I see Karen Kwan. If you'd like to come up and offer your 2-minute comments, and then make sure you fill out a green card before you leave today, that'd be great. Hi.
Thank you very much. I'm Karen Kwan. I am a member of the House of Representatives, but of course today I come as a citizen and a member of the Chinese community. Probably all of you know Plum Alley and where it is, and you've seen it, and you can imagine what Chinatown looked like at the time. But most of our Utahns don't know Plum Alley. And I am constantly surprised at how many of our Chinese community don't know about Plum Alley, don't know the history, don't know what it used to look like and the vibrancy of that area. Today, our Chinese descendants group is working to put up a monument or a statue in the area to make sure that our community members and our Utahns know about it. And that's something that I'd like to speak to in this area, is talking about the vibrancy of the of this area, and to not lose that. So coming from the Chinese community, we have lost our history, and we have lost the culture in the area, and we're trying to bring that back. And that's something that we would very much not like to see happen with the Japanese community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kwan. All right. Anybody else? Speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, moving on. We have a public hearing today, item B, around to amend the fiscal year 2018-2019 RDA budget. This is primarily focused on the excellence in community concerts. We have not yet received our transmittal. Is that correct?
I don't believe we have, but it's probably on its way. And so, just from a procedural standpoint, if the board could continue the public hearing. It's already been noticed, so we sort of are required legally to have it, but just so that we satisfy our noticing requirements, if you could continue the public hearing and take action at the August meeting, that would help.
All right. Seeing nobody from the audience that would like to speak on this matter, I'll look for a motion to continue the public hearing.
Moved. So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Board Member Mendenhall and a second by Board Member Johnston. All those in favor?
Aye.
And that carries. That will be on our August agenda. Moving along to item C, number 1, approval of minutes from June 12th, 2018. Does any board member have any questions, or is there a motion?
I'll move approval of those minutes.
Second.
It's been moved by Board Member Mendenhall and a second by Board Vice Chair Fowler. All those in favor?
Aye.
And that motion carries. We are on to item 2, C2. This is a predisposition property report as required by RDA board policy for 528 Arctic Court. It looks like we have Susan, is that right? Suze and Danny at the table. Hey guys.
Hello there.
Hi.
I'll let you go ahead and kick it off for us today.
This is just a quick briefing on a disposition briefing for the board regarding the Arctic Court property at 528. I will let Suze give a little bit of background on the project and where it stands right now, and then this is really just more informational in terms of what the process is for disposing the property.
Thanks. I am going to just give a brief update on the predisposition report, and then we also have David Ammett here in the audience from Preservation Utah if there's other specific questions about the project. But it's a joint renovation between the RDA and Preservation Utah, which was formerly Utah Heritage Foundation. The renovation's nearly complete, and Preservation Utah is just finalizing the interior finishes, landscaping, driveway, and garage. And it's anticipated to be on the market in September of this year. And as you read, probably in the predisposition report, our method of disposition that's planned is to market it with a real estate broker to put it up on the market for sale in this area. And hopefully that will be done in September. That's pretty much it.
Board members, any questions on this project?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I was hopeful that we'd get to see some of the inside pictures. I think the only current picture still has the windows boarded.
Yes.
So if preservation is able to share any photos just as a follow-up,
Sure.
I think that would be helpful for
Happy to do
us to see
Yeah.
the progress that they made,
Sounds
that we made together. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Mendenhall. Anybody else? Okay. Thanks to you, Susan, Danny.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item C2 is the Pioneer Park project funding request. We have Danny staying with us and Tammy Hunsaker from the RDA staff. If you could introduce us to this topic and talk to us about why
Sure.
the RDA is being requested for these funds.
I will let Tammy give you that update.
Sure. I can briefly provide some context to the funding request, and then Kristen Riker and Nancy Monteith are here from Parks and Public Lands if there are specific questions on the project. So Parks and Public Lands is working on a Pioneer Park project, of which the scope is a new multipurpose field, walking path lighting, and tree plantings. The project's estimated cost was $850,000 previously, with approximately $550,000 coming from the Capital Improvement Program and the balance coming from the Pioneer Park Coalition. As it turns out, the project's currently in the bidding phase, and the bids have come back higher than previously anticipated, so there's a $90,000 funding gap. And Parks and Public Lands has submitted a request that $70,000 of this be covered by the RDA. And then the remaining balance, they're going to ask for the additional funds from the Pioneer Park Coalition. It's really important that these funds be secured in a timely manner because the bid needs to be awarded by the end of July, or they have to put it out for rebid. So there's a timeliness to this funding request. And if the board wishes, funds may be appropriated from an unappropriated holding account for capital improvement projects. Through the funding year 2019 budget process, the RDA staff, we had actually proposed that these funds be used for a downtown placemaking incentive program for public spaces within the central business district. So the nature of this project kind of fits with that previous budget proposal through the funding year 2019 budget. So if the board wishes today, it's my understanding that you could appropriate these funds through motion. And as I said, Kristen Riker and Nancy Monteith are here, and they can speak more to the Capital Improvement Program funds, and there's a cost overrun account. I know there were questions around that. So I'll turn it over.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to board members. Mendenhall, Board Member Mendenhall, you want to start?
Thank you. And perhaps this is a question for Nancy and Kristen. I wanted to just get an update on the availability of parks impact fees and how that account is looking in terms of the timeliness of this happening and whether or not there's any impact fees burning a hole in our pocket that we'll have to return in the short term if we don't spend them.
Right now, there is no hole in our pocket where we're going to have to return funds. So there is some previous funds that should have been returned years ago that are going to have to be refunded, but there's nothing at this point we can do about those. We're on track to spend all of our impact fee funding.
Okay.
So we're good on there. There is some money, I think it's under $60,000 in the impact fee fund right now that's unobligated. So we didn't approach the impact fee direction for funding in part for the same reason that we didn't approach the cost overrun. the cost overrun. Initially, we were under the impression that there wasn't enough funding in that account, and the other portion of this, which affects both impact fees as well as cost overrun, is that it would require a budget amendment, and the next budget amendment for fiscal year 19 can be submitted in mid-August, and you wouldn't have the opportunity to approve it until November, and our bids are good until July 31st, and so if we lose this bid, we'll have to rebid it, and there is a concern that the cost will go up even further if we have to rebid after July 31st.
Good answer. Thanks, Kristen.
Anybody else? Any other board member questions?
I have a couple questions.
Board member Rogers.
Mine is, I guess, more in regards to the improvements of Pioneer Park. I was just wondering, I know that there are going to be new sycamore trees planted, but in order to do the field, how many trees are going to have to be removed?
53.
So,
And about half of those are in fairly poor condition, is what our urban forester has said. They're in pavers, and they're not doing very well. There are some trees that are very healthy that would have to come out.
so 53 trees removed, and how many will be replanted?
I believe it's 24 trees.
Yeah, there it is. I see it.
Yep.
Okay.
So part of the reason why we're not replanting them in Pioneer Park at this time is because the park, we feel, is going to undergo, we hope, is going to undergo some changes. And we don't want to plant trees where we may end up putting restrooms or a stage or whatever else the community decides they want. And we hope to plant more trees in that park, but feel at this time if we planted 53 more trees, it would really limit us as to what we can do in the future.
Okay. Thank you.
Board member Johnston.
Can you help me understand how you got to the $70,000, $20,000 split to fund this gap?
So the project was kind of split into two areas. Excuse me. And the first area is to open up the center and provide the sidewalks. It was split with the lighting, and the coalition was very interested in contributing to this project. And they had committed about $300,000 for the lighting. When the bids came in, the lighting, the physical lighting itself came in at $317,000 and change. And so the way we came about the split was just based on the fact that the lighting is, the physical lighting is $317,000. Actually, the lighting costs more like $480,000 when you talk about all of the electrical and the boards and that kind of thing, and design that has to go into it. So we decided to ask the coalition if they would be willing to pay that extra funds for specifically the lighting.
Excuse me. What came back higher than anticipated? Labor, materials?
Let me tell you here. So the lighting came in about, let's see. The entire project came in actually at $871, and then there's contingency and design and engineering costs and review by the contractor, which adds up to $940. So everything, everything came in just a little bit more than anticipated, yeah.
Okay, so not one area, but it was across the board.
It's not specific. It's across the board. Everything is more expensive. The electrical is definitely more expensive than we had anticipated.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Board member Fowler.
So have you already reached out to the Pioneer Park Coalition, and they've already sort of secured that other 20,000?
I have reached out to the Pioneer Park Coalition, and they have been talking about it, and I feel confident that the funding will be there.
And we do have the executive director of Pioneer Park Coalition here if you'd like to ask directly. Yeah, David, I see you in the audience. Would you mind coming up and answering a few questions? There's a spot right here next to Danny. If you wouldn't mind stating your name and title for the record.
David Garbett, I'm the Executive Director of the Pioneer Park Coalition.
Great. Board Member Fallard?
I'll ask you the question. So how do you feel about this request about the $20,000 from the Pioneer Park Coalition to help this $90,000 funding gap?
So we are committing $300,000 for park construction. And this was initially, I think that the Pioneer Park Coalition, we've been having this conversation with the city about doing this work together for some time. We're very excited about this project and looking forward to working with the city. Initially, we had committed $250,000 to help the city with this construction. And in this recent iteration, we bumped that up to $300,000 to try and capture lighting. At this time, we are interested in seeing if the RDA would cover that full $90,000. And if that's not something you have the appetite to do, then I think we can have that conversation with our board. But $20,000 might not sound like a significant addition to $300,000, but $300,000 was twice my approved budget, essentially, at the start of this year. So it is a significant amount for us. Love to see the project happen. So if that's just not possible, let's talk about that. But it is quite a bit for us.
Board members? Okay. Board Member Mendenhall.
Not for David, though, but you could stay there. Nice to see you, David. Take me back to where the $70,000 is coming from, the appropriation that we made for downtown placemaking in the CD.
In this current year budget, fiscal year 19 budget, we had an allocation for downtown placemaking. We actually had it last year as well.
You speak up, Danny.
Sorry.
I think it's just, thanks.
In the fiscal year 19 budget, it was $344,000 that we set aside. It's unallocated this time. It's in the CIP holding, or the capital projects holding accounts for the agency. So we felt that given the description of what those funds were intended for, placemaking, open space downtown, that these improvements to the park fit that. And so that was money that could come and be allocated through the board by way of motion and be available to still make it possible to accept this bid for the park improvements.
I guess I'm interested in making a motion for the full amount, and I haven't talked to my peers about this, but I am feeling sensitive that today's July 10th. You have a very rapidly approaching date by which you need to have those funds secured to commence with your contract opportunities. And I think that this money does fit the placemaking intent of the 344 that we set aside in our budget. So, Mr. Chair, may I make a motion?
Would you mind holding your motion for a moment?
Absolutely, no problem.
Yeah, I have a couple questions myself, but I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity. Would any other board members have questions at the moment? Okay. Kristen, can you tell me how much money we have in the cost overrun account for CIP? Is that something that you can answer?
That might be better answered by finance, because I've gotten two different numbers. The last amount I got, I don't have it with me.
I understand the urgency with this bidding process, and we want to make sure that we're moving forward quickly. So I understand the need of turning to RDA for these funds instead of going through the budget amendment process. But ideally, this should be funded through the cost overrun account, board members. At least that's my opinion.
Mr. Chair, the last communication we got, which I don't know if it's matches this number, but maybe it's in the ballpark, was $273,000 in the cost overrun account, but I don't know if that's the correct number. So
I've gotten that number and another number in the 164. So there's definitely enough funding in that account, and from what I've been told, to cover this amount.
And as far as the downtown placemaking, $344,000, RDA staff, can you talk to me about what your vision is for the placemaking money and what you hope to accomplish in the FY 2019 budget with these resources?
The idea with that was twofold. One, to make it available to developers who were doing projects downtown to see if they could incorporate public space or plazas within those developments, and or two, go and target and accumulate funds to where we could potentially target an existing plaza that maybe was in need of repair and improvements. So right now it was just an allocation of funds, and then given that they were secured, we would go out and target opportunities.
I don't want to dig too much into this, but what is your definition of placemaking?
That's a great question, and I laugh because Court is actually probably the best one to answer that, and so we have those conversations. But placemaking is essentially any public space that we feel would either be active through passive or active programming, available to public use, something that would be viewed as an amenity within downtown, something that would offer itself to either programming of concerts, events, or just passive use by the public.
At this program, we were looking specifically at enhancing public spaces, providing more of an identity to the downtown area, and then also we specifically said improving pedestrian flow through the area, so whether that's through enhanced public spaces or mid-block walkways. We feel the Pioneer Park project meets that because they're opening up the center, they're putting in new sidewalks, so there will be enhanced flow through the park. Another criteria of the program funding, we said we'd leverage it with private investment, and we're doing that in this instance as well through the Pioneer Park Coalition's investment.
Okay.
Councilman Kitchen, one other comment on the cost overrun is, so there's a 10% of project limit that we can utilize cost overrun for, is my understanding. And I'm not sure if that is based on the CIP amount or the CIP amount as well as the donation amount.
It's actually a little bit, maybe just a little nuanced. The administration can administratively approve use of the cost over an account. It has to do with the total project budget. So if it's 10% more than the total project budget, the administration can administratively approve use of the cost over an account. I think when Ben calculated it, this was slightly more than 10%. And so that would need to come back to the council. In that case, it would come back to the council because it was approved by the council, which would trigger the budget amendment process. And I think that was what was discussed before about the timing urgency of this. So that's where, yeah. So just my quick back of the envelope calculation, the original 850 would be $85,000. 10% would be $85,000. So it's of the new number. The 10% applies to the new number, the actual amount. Okay, so we're looking at 94,000 instead of. Okay, so I guess I don't want to get into the details too much, but my proposal to the board is that we fund this today, either 70,000 or 90,000. I'm agnostic about the amount, but I would like for this to come out of the CIP cost overrun account. So. Is there a possibility for the administration to reimburse through RDA for this at some point in a budget amendment, and how would we go about that today?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could initiate that process. You obviously would approve it today, and then we would just initiate that through the normal administrative or budget approval, budget amendment process. And Mr. Chair, could we have a friendly suggestion now that impact fees were raised and there are potentially even a small amount of impact fees that would need to be refunded soon, that we also ask the administration to look at potentially using some impact fees that would otherwise need to be refunded in addition to the cost overrun account, just so that we're not sort of missing that opportunity.
Yeah, great suggestion. Anything else, board members? Do you want to make a motion, board member?
I think you just did.
Okay. Well, in that case, I will move. I propose that we straw poll
90,000.
fully funding this at $90,000 from the downtown placemaking. Excuse me?
Want to break up the vote?
Well, if you vote against it, what are you voting against? The 90,000 for 70 or the where it comes from? I just want to confuse those two issues, that's all.
Do you want to vote on the 90 first and then go on the funding?
All right, so let's do a quick straw poll. Board members, if you are in favor of funding this at $90,000, give me a thumbs up. All right, so we have 5 in favor, 1 opposed, and board member Wharton in abstention. So it looks like we'll move forward with the fully funding of this park improvement cost overrun. And now my proposal is that we fund it today from the downtown placemaking and request that the administration come back to us with a proposal to make whole the downtown placemaking account through the cost overrun account, and also have them look into the park impact fees possibilities. That sound good? All in favor? That motion carries 6-0. Any other questions? Awesome. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, you guys. We are moving on to item C4, which is a consideration for Block 67, or parking structure at Block 67. At the table today, we have a full table. All right. We have Danny Waltz, Court Utley, Jill Wilkerson-Smith, Allison Rowland from the council office, and we also have our Deputy Director Jennifer Bruno next to me, who can help answer any questions as well. Allison, can you kick this off for us?
I will do my best.
Thank you.
So this is a relatively complex proposal, and staff has done our best to try to understand it, and I'll give you the presentation of what we do understand as of today, and I hope that the RDA staff and others will correct us if we have things wrong. The goal today is really about considering the initial steps toward funding an underground parking structure as part of the large-scale development on Block 67. So these are just the initial steps. They're not a yes or no on the development project itself. Specifically, the board is asked today to consider the adoption of two proposed resolutions. The first would approve an interlocal agreement with Salt Lake County that, one, allows the transfer of $15 million incentive to the developer via the city and the RDA, and two, commits the city to a timeline of actions to facilitate the removal of some of this property from the CBD to create a new CRA. I just realized why things look blurry to me. It's because my glasses are in my pockets. Excuse me. Much better. The second proposed resolution would be to authorize RDA staff to prepare a draft community reinvestment project area plan for Block 67. This resolution would authorize the beginning of work on this plan. It would not bind the board to a tax increment reimbursement structure. So it would just be getting clearer essentially the financials involved with the project. The project itself, as you know, is on Block 67, which is just west of the Salt Palace. It's bounded by 1st and 2nd South and by 2nd and 3rd West. The project developer is Ritchie Group, and it would be a mixed-use project that would include residential, commercial, and office space, and that would include retail, dining, and hotels. It would also include this large parking structure, which will have some spaces commercially available to the public. The total amount of private investment could reach about $450 million, and that's currently structured in 2 phases. The complicated stuff starts with the proposed funding. Salt Lake County coordinated with the developer on this proposal. The developer would request an initial incentive, or is requesting an initial incentive of $15 million. The county would provide this amount through the Utah State Transportation Fund for a new item referred to as a regionally significant transportation facility. The county would pay the state back through an authorized funding mechanism that increases motor vehicle fees collected by the county. So the county has greater collections. They're able to reimburse that $15 million provided by the state for this regionally significant transportation facility. The county would then be reimbursed by Salt Lake City's tax increment from the area, which would likely be 75% of the total over a 25-year project agreement. And council staff understands that this fund would then be repurposed for future regionally significant transportation projects. So once this $15 million passes through the city to the RDA, to the CRA, to the developer, it would then be passed back to the county, which would keep it to set up what you could loosely think of as a revolving loan fund for transportation projects at the county level.
Mr. Chair, can I ask for clarification on that?
By all means, Board Member Mendenhall.
Allison, you've done an incredible job on the staff report, but just on that point to make sure that I'm clear about it. The 15 million reimbursement from the county to the state would happen through the increase in the motor vehicle fees.
Yes.
Not from our tax increment. So then the tax increment, 75% that we could potentially collect and for 25 years distribute back to the county would be to recreate the fund from which the 15 million would be.
That is our understanding. I also understand that Carlton Christensen is somewhere behind me and may be able to answer additional questions. I don't know if the chair would like to
For now, that's
consider
all I
that
need.
now.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, I can just jump in here too a little bit, is that a lot of these kind of technical details are, we understand through communications that the administration has had with the county. They're not necessarily written down in the interlocal agreement itself. And so these are a lot of the questions that we have that we'd like to get in writing at some point, you know, later on down the process when our board is considering more of this. But these are the kinds of questions where if the board is interested in us exploring them, it would be helpful for us to continue conversations with the county. So.
And we have also included a number of those as policy questions, these sort of details that we're scratching our heads about, trying to make sure we understand well. The policy questions are listed out individually, pulled out of the staff report on a sheet that I believe was sent to you yesterday, and that's in your packets, and now with the packet online. Now, another thing we understand as staff is that in addition to the $15 million incentive, which would be directed toward the parking structure, the developer is also working with the RDA staff to have a larger reimbursement agreement. But this is not yet finalized. The actual amount has not yet been fixed upon, as far as I know. The contrary question, what would happen if the board does not approve the public subsidy? What we understand is that the developers would scale back the project, building an above-ground parking lot in the center of Block 67, and they would eliminate the proposed public mid-block street connecting 3rd West and 2nd South. The proposed TI reimbursement also would require establishing a new CRA, and before doing this, the RDA would need to remove the southern part of Block 67 from the existing CBD, the Central Business District. So that would be another step in the process, and we have a summary of those processes in the staff report.
Allison,
Yes.
really quickly on that. Has staff done any work on what that would mean for the CBD project area? And I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that, Jill, Danny.
We haven't done that analysis, and we can get into this a little bit more after Allison's done. Part of the reason for that is because in order to really initiate that third-party analysis and to get in that level of detail, we were looking for direction from the board on whether they even wanted to consider setting up the project area. And so that analysis would be included as part of reviewing the potential for setting up a project area, what that increment would be from the new area, as well as what that impact would be on the existing CBD. So.
Allison, do you have more? I know you do.
Just a couple more items, Mr. Chair. One is the alternative to adopting these resolutions. If the board chooses not to adopt these resolutions, the process would terminate and the administration would work to, or could work, I should say, with the developer to try to identify other paths, for example, a loan or a tax increment reimbursement that would still fall under the terms of the current CBD project area. So it would not necessarily be a rejection of the project itself. It would simply be a different way of cooperating with the project and encouraging the project. In terms of timing, would you like me to go over the timing now? Okay, I feel like I can't go over it too many times. This has been set up very similar to the RDA's tax increment reimbursement program policy, which it approved last fall. So you can look at attachment 1. There's a flow chart and attachment to your staff report that gives you an idea, a sort of visual idea of what would happen. But I should point out that this project actually technically doesn't qualify for the RDA tax increment reimbursement program policy because it is not the expansion of an existing business. It's more of a redevelopment project.
Can I ask RDA staff why we are being asked to make an exception to our TI? I mean, we just adopted this policy less than a year ago, so can you talk us through this a bit more?
So I believe what we're talking about is the single property CRA portion of the policy. That is an economic development-driven program that we now have that's brand new. We have done tax increments in the past, tax reimbursements in the past for projects that meet RDA goals, and those are kind of termed regular tax increment reimbursements. I would note that this particular project does request a 25-year stream. In our current policy, we only allow up to 10 years for a regular tax increment reimbursement. So it is unusual and outside of the policy in that regard.
Okay. Allison?
Just to finish up on the timeline. So in the August or September council meeting, the RDA staff would transmit a resolution amending the boundary. I'm sorry, this is the August or September council meeting because we'll actually have to do things both in the council meeting and the RDA should the board wish to go forward. So in the council meeting, the council would receive a resolution that amends the boundary of the downtown CBD project area, and the council would consider that as a taxing entity, whether they would like to participate in that. This is similar to resolutions that would be provided to other taxing entities for their consideration. In the RDA board meeting, the RDA would consider a resolution adopting the draft CRA plan prepared by the RDA staff. It would consider adoption of a resolution approving an interlocal agreement between the RDA and the developers to facilitate the transfer of $15 million. The RDA would also consider the staff's evaluation of the project's reimbursement application based on both a third-party financial analysis and an RDA Finance Committee review. There would begin a 30-day public comment period, and the board would hold a public hearing during that RDA board meeting. And finally, in the August or September board meeting, the board could also choose not to adopt those resolutions, the resolutions under consideration on that day, and that too would terminate the process and suggest that the RDA perhaps work to use other mechanisms to work with this project. And then there would be a later council meeting. The date would have to be decided later, where the City Council would provide notice of the beginning of a review period for the CRA plan. And at the end of that review period, the council could consider approval of the ordinance change and resolutions to approve the interlocal agreements to provide city tax increment to the CRA to facilitate the project. So there are at least 2 more meetings of RDA board and the council to make decisions about this project.
Thank you, Allison. You know, without diving into the merits of the Ritchie project itself, this does present a number of policy questions for the RDA, and I think the biggest one for me right now is, well, there's a number of them that are important, but the one that comes to mind is the issue of staff time. And I would appreciate a straightforward response from the administration on what exactly this will consume by way of staff time. We are in the process of creating 2 new project areas in the 9 line on the State Street. We also have been pouring an enormous amount of time into the Northwest Quad. We have Depot District, we have Granary District, we have a number of issues that are going to consume staff time. Talk to me about this and why this is a priority for you.
I appreciate the question. First, let me, before I really get into the details, I want to thank Allison for all of her work on this and the rest of council staff, because this has not been easy to sort through on our end, so I can imagine and appreciate what it's been for you, so thank you very much. Speaking of that, in terms of staff time, we've already invested a considerable amount of staff time just getting it to this point. This is a very complex development and project. This is a very unique request. This has been initiated by the developer in terms of incentive and assistance from the RDA, and it was done so in a way that the request was made with a sense of urgency to meet their timelines. And so we've invested a considerable amount of time just to get it to this point and get it prepared for today's meeting. Moving forward, this would continue to be a significant amount of staff time to meet the deadlines. This is something we've expressed to the developer and the county all along. Obviously, we have those resources within staff, but the issue for us has been the same that when we've talked to you about any other projects or project areas that we're considering either creating or extending, is it's a choice. And when we brought that to you a few months ago with some of the other ideas, you as a board made it very clear that your priority was the 9-line State Street project areas, and nothing is to slow those down, and we have honored that. We fully intend to continue on that timeline, but we are now having to fit this request and this project area creation shortly after that. And so that is an issue for us as staff in terms of prioritizing other projects and what we're working on. But it has also raised to light a lot of issues that we have that we're going to get into here in terms of things that we would like to create and set up within the agency so that when these requests come in, we have a more streamlined process and approval and consideration requests for things like this that we can apply. It will be an issue for staff. It will be something that we now have to make a priority in order to meet these deadlines, because if we approve this interlocal agreement as well as the receipt of money from the county, those come with deadlines that we then have to meet. So we are prepared to do that. We're able to do that, but I'm not going to sit up here and say that other projects won't be put on the back burner a little bit in order to do that.
Board members, do you have questions at this point?
I do. There's also that policy question. Is this a pro or is this a con for Japantown? And I would like to get that perspective as well.
Yeah, I think the easy answer to that is anytime you have a developer who's willing to invest $450 million in your downtown, that I think on the surface is a pro. I think when that investment comes with it a request for public incentives or participation, I think the question then from a policy standpoint comes down to what is the public benefit, or what do we hope to accomplish or receive out of this in terms of making sure that that's a development that we do want downtown. And I think that's what we have started trying to do as part of staff. I think that is what we look to the board in terms of getting direction of what you would like to see within that third-party analysis, so that when this comes back to you as a request for setting up a project area and or that reimbursement agreement with the developer, you are able to make that decision and feel like you are getting a public benefit for your investment. And whether that simply is just the investment itself and the development, or whether it's other issues that affect the neighborhood and the community surrounding it, and or what you'd like to see from it in terms of housing or uses, that's what we hope to answer for you.
How you feeling, James?
We can talk a little bit about it later.
Board Member Johnston.
This is maybe more of a county question. The 15 million reimbursement is for a regionally significant transportation project, which is parking in this sense, right? The underground parking. But there's 2 phases that I understand it. Would the public parking be part of the second phase? Because it looks like the first phase doesn't have a lot of public accessible parking to it, but phase 2 would have the bulk of that. Is that accurate?
It is, yeah. There is parking in the first phase, but I think there's a nuance here to bring to light, which is the $15 million incentive passed through the RDA from the county is really about the first public gesture of support into the project in terms of public financing. Without that money invested into the project, the developer is going to do what they're referring to as the but-for option, which Allison referred to in her staff memo and also in her comments, which is the 2 residential buildings, the apartment buildings, the above-ground parking structure in the center of the block, and the hotel. So it's sort of a choice between 2 different site plans and approaches to urbanism. The 15 million gets you the preferred option. The not participating with those funds gets you the other option.
I just didn't want to get hung up on if there is an intent in that 15 million for a public sort of parking option, if this was fitting that or not. But it sounds like that's not necessarily a
There's
binding
like
piece.
38 parking stalls or so that are commercially available to the public as part of the first phase. The bulk of them, as you've pointed out, which is in excess of 800 that would be available to the public, comes in phase 2.
There's no date set for phase 2 at this point, sort of?
No, but I do know that Ryan Ritchie is here and could comment on that if that was appropriate for the chair. It's I think a 6 to 8 year build-out period.
Okay.
Board Member Johnston is, I know that we have Carlton from the county here as well, and it may be worthwhile to invite Carlton Christensen to come up and be available for questions. Board Member Mendenhall, please.
For Carlton. Thank you.
former council member Christensen. We still have your chair.
I seem to have that pattern of leaving chairs.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for the time that you took to brief me on this before today's meeting a couple of weeks ago. And I want to get to there's a lot of questions, I think, but I want to get to the foundational one of the 15 million. And as Allison did a good job of explaining it, it sounds like what's being created is a revolving loan fund at the county. And I want to talk about the expectations of future mechanisms by which those funds could be accessed and utilized. I also want to talk about, I'd like to hear you talk about what happens when the $15 million that will be coming from an increase in the motor vehicle fees is repaid to the state, and what the county will do with that increased increment after the 15 million.
So I would make maybe a correction to that. It's not a new fee. In I think about 2002, the county imposed what is known as the third quarter tax. A portion goes to UTA. Actually, a little less than a quarter of the quarter went to the county of the First Class Highway Fund. That fund is held by UDOT and has historically always been administered or decided upon by the state legislature. In the last few years, those funds have been given to the county, and the county's then redistributed it to individual cities. And we've most recently did that in SB 277, where UDOT issued a $47 million bond against those. And then the revenue from that source, which is a sales tax, existing sales tax, goes to pay off those bonds. In this particular case, there was some, and because it's sales tax driven, there's a variable to what it generates. And in a good climate that we're currently in, it generated a little more than what was needed for existing debt. And so the legislature set aside a portion of that. And then because there was not an ability to bond against it, enabled the Transportation Commission to forward or advance funds from the State Infrastructure Board. And the Transportation Commission a few weeks ago created that mechanism and will be advancing those funds. The repayment of that advancement will be this portion of the sales tax each year until the full amount has been repaid. And so right now we're anticipating 2 projects. I'll find out here in a minute whether or not they get approved, because our council is having a similar deliberation. But in addition to this particular project, we're proposing to use it to fund a project that we have in Cottonwood Heights. Similar in nature, we're building a park, making available a parking structure, some funds to a private developer through their redevelopment agency to enable public parking, in this case at the mouth of Big Cottonwood Canyon. And then in turn, the tax increment from that project area will repay the funds. Our goal long-term is to take the repayment of those funds and create a revolving loan fund and then make them available. And the most likely borrower is, although it could certainly be any governmental entity, we wouldn't foresee making a direct loan to a private developer, is most likely a redevelopment agency, because but if a city wanted to do it and they wanted to use their own general tax funds for repayment, we certainly wouldn't be opposed to it. But understanding that we're all looking toward post-performance when possible, that tax increment is probably the most logical mechanism for repayment.
Thanks for breaking that down for us. So the variability of sales tax income, help me understand if that variable decreases significantly and you aren't able to, or how would the county and the state manage the repayment of the 15 without the increase?
Fortunately, in this case, the repayment is just to from one state fund to another state fund. But they did take into account about a 15-year average of general sales tax, which was just a little over 3%. Those are factored in to those numbers. And historically, the finance folks in UDOT have been to be honest, a little bit conservative, and so that's usually not been the problem. I imagine if there was a shortage or some serious drop-off in sales revenues, we would have to revisit with them, but it's not an additional public issuance of bonds.
Okay, so I want to put a lid on that piece of the conversation.
Sure.
You've answered my questions sufficiently that I feel like I can move to the other piece of that, which is as a RDA board, we have had typically the opportunity to be presented with a project proposal, look at the public benefits there, maybe negotiate a bit with that applicant on what those benefits need to be in terms of fulfilling our goals as a RDA in an area. And this one takes that conversation a bit off the table for us by placing it with the county. And additionally, since I've been on the council, we've had a parking utilization study completed that included our downtown area that showed we are overparked as a city, given a $450 million investment in a downtown area will certainly demand more parking than that block currently parks. I understand that. But the idea that our tax increment conversation be turned toward an increase, a significant increase in what is for that 15 million strictly for parking is, puts us, I think, in a very unique position. So being a former council member, can you help me understand from now your role in this other seat, literally, how you can help us to recognize a public benefit here, a service to, it doesn't fit in what we would do.
Yeah.
We see too much parking. We want increased public transportation. We want affordable housing. We want public benefit. Show me, help me see that.
I mean, I can think of two things, and I thought about this a little bit. First of all, I should clarify that while a developer approached the county and we indicated we were willingness, we would follow the city's pursuit. And it's one of the reasons why the loan agreement would be between us and the city. And so if for some reason you as the policy board make a decision not to go forward, we won't be doing a side deal or anything like that. We want to go forward, we'll follow your direction and decision. As far as the location, I've thought about this a little bit, and as I think back a little bit, there's been some key nodes within the city, and some of which have been driven by the Redevelopment Agency, one actually before my time, and that's Gallivan Plaza. Gallivan, when they put that parking structure there and they developed the stuff around it, serviced more than one area in addition to the Gallivan Plaza, and became a key focal point. City Creek did it, obviously, with their own private dollars, and I see this as a similar kind of site. The user, a large user, is going to be kitty corner at the arena, but there are other particular uses around that. And one of my responsibilities is for the Salt Palace Convention Center, and we facilitate some of the development happening around there that are looking for parking, and are making available to them parking. In one hotel's case, diminished what their obligations were to build additional structures since they could demonstrate a lease agreement. And I do think that there is a value in having centralized parking places, because then people know you can go. For example, you can always find some place at Gallivan, or you go to City Creek, and I often walk a block or so off City Creek. I just know that it's going to be available there. And there is Gateway on the other side of the arena and stuff, and it certainly has its availability there, but this whole area has sort of had this sort of void. They've been filled in part by surface parking lots, but those surface parking lots are getting replaced at in a good way, at a remarkably fast pace. And so I think unless you look long-term at a public parking structure or parking available to the parking, that long-term there, I think what you'll have is a lot of small parking structures associated with these developments.
Even with the under 40 public parking spaces?
Even, I'm sorry?
It sounds like there's under 40 public parking spaces. 38 public parking stalls?
Yeah.
Oh, in the first phase, I'm sorry. That may be. I think my reference is long-term if on full build-out.
And do we have a ratio of public parking to the private parking in the full development of the project? And you don't have to pull that out right now, but if someone could let us know at some point, that would be helpful.
And I know Board Member Fowler has a follow-up.
And I'm going to kind of take this out of what may be like a disagreement with parking versus non-parking, because my understanding is that there's going to be a parking garage there one way or another, right?
That's my understanding as well.
So what I'd like to actually kind of maybe turn this back to just a little bit is sort of that bigger, broader picture, that more long-term idea that you were mentioning, Carlton. And then thank you again for that breakdown in the beginning, because it really did kind of put some pieces of the puzzle together for me. But if this evolves into what the county is envisioning it evolving into as a sort of revolving loan fund, one of the questions, and I would say maybe concern, but mostly just a question, if a city participates in this, like Salt Lake City, for example, what sort of criteria does the county have, or will the county have, in that revolving loan fund, such that if Salt Lake City is kind of repaying back that revolving loan fund, how do we make sure that we're getting some of that back? Right now, my understanding is that it's a regionally significant transportation project, which could include public transportation as well, correct? But what are the criteria that the county is envisioning so that we kind of have a little bit of surety of saying, okay, we want to, sure, this sounds great, and we're going to get something back out of it in that sort of broader sense?
Well, I would say before this, we've not had the luxury to develop a policy just based on the fact that we've had available funds. But I will walk you through a little bit in the project that we did with Cottonwood Heights, and that is, as we are, and UDOT is currently doing an EIS on the Little Cottonwood side, but as we look at the demands that are being placed on the canyons and the overflow of parking that's happening, and the lack of and the difficulty in transportation up and down the canyons during peak season, and increasingly as much in the summertime as in the wintertime, that a solution needed to be found. And so as we've looked at that particular investment, we've looked as it, first of all, we've not tried to incentivize retail. Retail is retail, and we're not opposed to it, but that's not a place where we've historically put our recent increment. But, is it creating employment opportunities? Is it solving multiple cases? In the case of the canyons, there's a transit stop near the parking structure that facilitates the transfer of somebody coming there to going up the canyon. Will it alleviate some of the demands placed upon the surrounding areas? So, and as we work with there are a number of communities that frankly are working on town centers, often near transit stops on their place, and they're running into the same dilemma, the big parking structure. Sandy, for example, has experienced this in their Cairns area, and we recently did advance them some transportation funds to build a structure there. So the dialogue is beginning. I'd say we're in the early stages of it.
And I guess to kind of clarify my question just a little bit is that if we enter into this and, 5, 10 years, 15 years, whatever long it takes to pay back that $15 million, can Salt Lake City then say, great, we have this other $15 million that we can reach into the counties, to ask the county for a different transit project or a developer or whoever?
I don't think it would certainly preclude you from any future availability of funds with a project. And I would imagine by then we'll have developed a more structured criteria and application process. We certainly are doing that now in our other transportation funds. And this came up as I guess I would say a pleasant surprise at the end of the session. It's not something we went searching for. We had created a sort of make-around solution on the Cottonwood Heights version, but it was a direction we wanted to go.
Board Member Mendenhall.
I didn't preface my previous questions with what I should have, which was that I really want to talk about this 15 million in a revolving loan fund with the county, and I don't want people to construe that these questions are necessarily reflective of this project, that the applicant and that project are not really on the table for us today. I know that this is absolutely about their ability to do the project the way that they'd ideally like to, but this relationship of the Salt Lake City RDA basically funding the creation or the replenishment of a $15 million revolving loan fund that we will not have authority over. That's a larger revolving loan fund than we currently have in our portfolio as an RDA, unless I'm mistaken. It's a significant investment for us that is, it's a little uncomfortable for I think for me as a board member to say, we're going to fund this to create more parking, let alone, but also that we're not going to have any authority over it. We can apply like everyone else, but it's our 15 million from Salt Lake City RDA going into it. You want to reply before I continue?
I would imagine that in the final creation of the CRA that you would also county participation in the district. Not all of the repayment, interestingly enough, will be city-driven funds. They will also include county-driven funds.
Can we shift, and I'm not sure this is directed at you actually, Carlton, but to talk about the expected effects and the potential mitigation efforts, if there are any, on Japantown from this proposed development, and if this is the time that maybe Mr. Chair wants to call the representative from the Ritchie Group up. I'm just wondering about where those conversations are at.
Let's do it. Yeah.
And I'll just pipe in, and I don't know if it's more applicable to have the conversation here or later in the council meeting. The council meeting is where you guys will be considering the rezoning request from the Ritchie Group. So you could have the conversation in both areas, frankly, because I think they're interrelated. But anyway, just wanted to flag that.
Why don't we invite them up? But in the meantime, I have a question here from Board Member Fowler. So why don't you jump in, Amy, and then we can have some folks from the Ritchie Group come up, and then Erin can re-pitch her question. Yep.
Well, I guess for me, I want to make clear of the distinction of what we're talking about right now, and it's separate from whether or not this particular project, the basis of this particular project versus this 15 million and what will happen with it. And those seem to be very connected, but in fact, right at this moment, they're sort of two distinct different things. This 15 million is asking us whether or not, from what I remember and understand from the staff report, would allow the RDA to go forward and kind of investigate this project and look into creating a new CDA and do the public benefit analysis and come back with a lot more information regarding the project itself. Is that accurate?
Yes, kind of.
I'm okay with kind of.
Yeah, and we can clarify that because I think as Allison stated and in her memo, there's a lot of parts to this, and I think it's helpful to clarify exactly what we're doing tonight versus what's going to come to you in different pieces, and at what times are you going to have those opportunities to make those decisions. So just to reiterate again this evening, what you're considering is, first and foremost, is a resolution that would be directing staff to even just start looking at creating a project area on this block. And so that would be kind of what initiates the whole process. At the same time—
I'm going to interrupt you real quick.
Sure, no, please.
And I'm only doing that because we're friends. I wouldn't interrupt anybody else out there. Meaning you would start the process, but it is not obligating the RDA board or the council to agree to any project area, correct?
Correct. It's not committing you to actually approve that project area as much as just starting that third-party analysis to gather the information, start running the numbers, start looking at what that impact is on not only this tax increment, but the existing CBD project area. And it's also not committing you or have anything to do with what ultimately would be the reimbursement agreement with the developer for the specific project and what those reimbursement terms would be subject to those negotiations. And then the second part is essentially approving the resolution which allows us to enter into the interlocal agreement with the county, by which the county has said they have this $15 million available. They are interested in potentially putting it in this project. And essentially that interlocal agreement with the county, all that really does is it has the county hold those funds for us, subject to us approving the project area and doing that reimbursement agreement with the developer. So that's really just the county saying, we're going to give you time to set up the project area, negotiate. If you don't, we get our money back. Actually, we don't even get it back. They don't give it to us, so yes. So those are the two items before you tonight. Now, the reason this gets complicated is, one, because of the structure and the nature of that $15 million, and number two, because this whole process essentially was developer initiated. And so it's a little bit of the cart before the horse, but what we're bringing to you tonight is essentially just that first step in what would be a normal process. We just have a lot more detail on the project and the specific development that we normally wouldn't have at this time.
Charlie, I have Aaron waiting in the wings, so is your question follow up on something that's been said, or is it independent? Okay, go ahead, please.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think it's going to take a lot of time. So by forwarding these proposals to the board, I take it, is it safe to assume that the RDA staff and the administration is supportive of both of these proposals?
At this time, yes. We support these proposals, which is essentially saying, let's start looking at the prospect of setting up a project area. And yes, county, we are potentially interested in receiving that $15 million if we decide to set up the project area and move forward with negotiating with the developer.
Okay, even though it's going to take away from other RDA projects?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Mendenhall.
Hi. Will you introduce yourself to us? I don't believe we've met.
That's all right. My name's Ryan Ritchie with the Ritchie Group.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
My question, again, was about we've heard from residents and people who want to represent the Japantown area on First South. In the brief presentation I had that Carlton was a part of, I don't think anyone from your group was able to be there, but I understand that there's some orientation concerns about back of house being facing the very rich cultural district on First South. So I wondered about if you could maybe enumerate some of the potential effects that are anticipated and whether or not you have contemplated mitigation efforts and had conversations with this community.
We have talked to Ms. Janey several times about this. I wish I had exhibits to show you. You'd have to kind of go off of memory right now of what you've seen. One of the initial designs, so as Janey's described her objections to the way our building has been designed, we're also following some very deep-rooted urban planning principles with a mid-block road that's making it so it's if you think about, here's how I usually describe this. Salt Lake City, we have usually large blocks, 9 to 10 acre blocks. They're very large blocks. The typical form of development in Salt Lake City is to surround the perimeter of our roads with what I call programming buildings. And then if you notice, most of the center portion of our blocks is where you put support, where you put typically parking. Parking's been so prohibitive, we just build in the middle of our blocks all the time. What we're proposing, and the reason this has become an issue, is we're proposing to put that garage below grade. There are only a few garages that have been built below grade in our entire city, and it's because they just cost prohibitive. It's very difficult to do that. You notice even major milestone buildings like 111 has an above grade garage. The new building that they're building at T8 on Tower 8 is also going to have an above-grade garage. I know Boyer and Cowboy are building a new apartment building that's also got an above-grade garage. It's very prohibitive to build anything below grade. So as we looked at our building, and if you look at the way that our design kind of starts in the northwest and it goes over to the southeast. Can everybody envision that? I hope you've seen that. So by putting that mid-block road in, we saw that as a natural pedestrian and vehicular road, similar to what you've seen, or maybe like Regent Street, or you see just across from Regent Street as you go through City Creek right by the Cheesecake Factory, and as that then recedes and leaves the site. It's one of the few opportunities in Salt Lake to try to bring the orientation to the middle of the block. We have purposely tried to line that entire road with we want to end up with that whole road being retail storefronts. We'll have over 80,000 square feet of retail on the ground floor of all these different buildings that are being built, and it's our vision to have that be, retail storefronts.
May I interject there?
You bet.
This board is quite familiar with the Regent Street mid-block, and we purchased the building there and took it down to create the T at the mid-block on Regent. And part of that desire to capture the flow coming out of City Creek and lead people into the Gallivan Center area, it was also that on the outside of the block, we have a intentionally activated streetscape. As you know, the Eccles Theater, those doors can swing open. We've got stairs that flow out. We have a very activated front space. And I think the concerns I'm hearing, and certainly the presentation I saw was not yet as granular as I'm sure future designs will be, but didn't give the feeling on First South that we would have an activated streetscape there. So I absolutely understand doing a mid-block. We do have significant block size, getting that pedestrian flow permeating the block. Can you talk to me about the activation on First South?
I'll tell you what we've done. I'll tell you where we started, where we've come from. Initially, all of our focus was on the inside of the building. We have some prohibitions to doing storefronts on the First South side because of the liquor laws of the state. So you have to be so many feet away from community centers, and churches qualify as community centers. So we have to bring the doors away from that. So the activation side has to be outside the 300-foot range anyway. So that was one of the factors as we're looking at, because we're not envisioning, this is Salt Lake's last opportunity, in our opinion, to develop something that will support what we hope happens as a sports and entertainment district for the state. Being this close to the arena, being this close to the convention center, we're a unique site that's kind of sandwiched between both of those. So as we heard the objections, the way we responded to that is we turned some seating. We reseated on our first floor level. We brought our restaurant space inside under the canopy. We turned it in to about 75 feet to the east so we could turn the corner and bring spill-out seating out to that corner and make it so you could have some activation around that corner as far as we could. When you start getting a little further, when you get a little too far, now you're into our...
You're heading east.
Yeah, that's right. When you're going east, if we go too far east, we're into our stair core. We're into the back of house area, which is going to be where you have your kitchen area. And that's all going to be behind a facade, and you'll see glass all the way for several hundred feet. But the activation portion came by trying to bring the storefront inside and have spill-out seating around the corner for 75 feet around the corner. That was one element we did. Another we did is we took our loading area and we recessed it 20 feet into our building. So we pushed it inside the building, so as we bring trucks and loading activities to the building, we're going to take them inside the building, and then they also have doors. We'll have doors be able to go. There's a door called a Rytec door, if you're familiar with the Rytec door, and it's a quick close, quick up, quick down, high commercial cycles. And we're investing in Rytec doors so that those doors will be open and close as fast as you can. I mean, they're really like a quick close. And so when the truck leaves, the door's down. So we're trying to keep those activities obscured and blocked and doing our best with that. I promised Janie that we would work on the time of day and have our truck activities, especially on the weekend when they have most of their festivals and church activities, that we'd be very, very amenable to trying to figure out early times to make sure they don't, involve. I don't want to disrupt their services. I don't want to disrupt anything about what their traditions and habits are. And we'll for sure work with them to do whatever we have to accommodate that.
And the waste receptacles?
Waste receptacles, you mean the trash receptacles?
Yeah,
right?
they're probably not inside your building, though.
They're inside the building. They are.
Behind the door.
They're behind the door inside the building. So the truck will pull in. We're actually going to use compactors for the trash facilities. And so that'll also reduce the number of cycle times as we come through the building. So they'll be inside, the truck will pull in, it'll do their change outs and pull out and then leave the door down. What you're going to see when you're from the street, they actually do have some pictures up. Let me see if this may not be the right presentation, but let me see if I can get you a shot of our building. This is for the next meeting. Let me see if I can.
And if we want to delay for appropriateness of our agenda, I just call a stop to it if.
I think that the direction of the chair and vice chair was to focus on the interlocal and the direction to RDA staff to begin the process of investigating a CDA. But I think these kinds of questions, to the extent that they can be sort of baked into the process early, if they're areas of interest to the council, is key. So we were sort of debating with, chicken or egg. So.
Has all board members, have you all had a chance to see these renderings? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Okay. That's good. I'm going to go to Charlie really quick.
Okay, so I appreciate that explanation, Jennifer, and I don't mean any disrespect at all to the chair and vice chair of the
Be
board.
careful.
I know. But I do think that the some of the specifics that Aaron was talking about are important to talk about today, because I do think that as fast as this is moving forward and as big as this interlocal is, it seems to me that this is the time to talk about some of those concerns that we may have, because I think that moving forward with the interlocal starts the process. I agree, but it also expedites the process that is once it starts. So I personally still think that there needs to be quite a bit in terms of the design and mitigation questions that need to be asked before I'm comfortable moving forward with the interlocal.
Do you have a question then?
So the question would be, and I know this is odd because I've never argued against a mid-block road before, but I think that the comparisons to Regent Street, and Aaron raised some of these issues, but I'm somewhat concerned about developing a new mid-block that we activate while killing the street activation on some of our other established streets. That I think this could do, and I understand the difficulty with the state liquor law and the 300-foot issue, but is there a way that you could move some of those internal issues? I know that you have the loading inside the building, you have the waste inside the building, but can that be done from the mid-block rather than one of the perimeter streets?
So I wish I could show this very well, but I'm just going to point to this. This highlights what I was showing you before, how we've reseeded the parking and trying to turn that corner. Our objective is to meet the Struve building across the street. We're hoping that becomes, we've heard several possibilities what that could become someday. So if that was a restaurant, if that was a community center, if that was we wanted to interact across the street with that as well. I believe our facade is a very attractive building, and if you look at the location, I apologize for the scale of this. I wasn't prepared for this question, but
no, it's okay.
That location there, right here, excuse me, is how far we've brought that loading activity. This is our drive lane in, and so this is the way we would route through from a traffic perspective, and then it'd be right next to our ramp down. And you can see how far back. You see that white area right there? That's the beginning of the door line is back in there. So it's been pushed back into the building. Your question is, can I relocate that? And relocating that will be on a 26-foot wide street be on a very small street. We're bringing this into a pedestrian scale street. We'd have to increase the size of the street. We'd probably lose program. We'd probably have to redesign our buildings at this point. There'd be several impacts to that, to be honest. Can't be done. Anything can be done. The point is that is it really what's right for the project long term? When what we're looking at is loading and unloading activities that happen along every street in Salt Lake City all day, every day. Every building you see has a function or an activity off of Main Street, First South, Second South, Third South, West Temple. I mean, every building has to figure out how they're going to load and unload a building and take care of their rubbish. I think we've minimized the impact of that by not having the trucks aren't going to be sitting out in front. They're going to be brought into the building.
No, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate your. I know that it was an unexpected question, so thank you for trying to answer it. One thing that you did say that I am a little bit concerned with is that when you were talking about the hope for something in the future and that across the street, and that you want to orient towards something that may come. You also have established areas that you can also be focusing on instead of just instead of a hope for something in the future. I really would have liked to have heard that there had been more collaboration with some of those existing uses that are long-term community-oriented uses, specifically with the church there. So I get the aspirational piece that you hope that there's going to be something in the future, but I think my concern is that you're ignoring some of the existing uses that you could be orienting to as well, and working to adapt with.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
We've actually had this conversation many times with most of my conversations have been with Ms. Iwamoto, and it was our intention to try to interact with across the street based on a request. The Struve building was what it's been highlighted to me as a potential community building. I guess I'm not certain what else could be done with if you look at First South right now. First South has had I would agree with them. It's been largely ignored for a long time. I think it's clear that we didn't start that process back in the 60s, and we're trying to bring enhanced value to that area now. I truly believe that with our presence, when we build this project, and we've extended the hand of this as well, is that we'd love to extend their festival and bring it into the project and make it part of the project. We'd love to be a part of that community. I think that our people who will live here, it's going to be a critical part of what they love about living here, is when they have that extension, that connection to something that's outside of their own. I really believe that.
Do you believe that your design right now does that?
I believe it, yeah, because of the mid-block aspect, and I believe that as we've turned the corner, if I could turn my entire focus and put storefronts along First South, that'd be great. But from a design perspective, I've got to load and unload somewhere, and I've got to bring, and it's a lot easier for me to get a 30-foot trash truck along First South, a city street, where I have a public access right as well, and to access and bring my truck off of First South than it is to bring it through a 26-foot road and tend to be. I'm also concerned about safety, and from a pedestrian scale perspective, I think that's a key factor as you build these roads, as you start bringing those big loading trucks through there. We've designed this so that the loading activities will be through this road here, and then along that area there, and that's it. Okay. And that's how we've designed it.
Okay, just to, for my fellow board members, that explanation helps. I do want to thank Aaron for raising some of these issues, and I think the questions that we're going to really have to ask ourselves based on some of the things that Aaron raised and that I've been concerned with is, we're hearing a lot about what's best for the project, what is in the best interest of the project moving forward. I think I still think that there's some work that needs to be done to figure out how to incorporate what's best for the project into also being what's best for the community. And I do think that, the merits to this project are great. I think we're close. I would just encourage the applicant to continue working with the church and that community to figure out if there are some things that can be that still can be done. In no way, I do get that anything can happen. One of the difficulties and challenges with an infill project like this is that you do have surrounding communities that you do have to adapt with. It's not just a blank slate that developers have in other places. And so I would just encourage you to continue your work on that.
Can I make one more point? Just when I was hearing from the back.
Chair. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, can I make one more point? Thank you.
Sure.
I'm not really formal. I apologize. Don't know how all this works, but I think Ms. Aaron, you asked a question about the percentage of parking that's available for public parking, and we anticipate at least 800 of our 1,861 stalls at a minimum, up to as many as 1,000. That percentage is between 43 to 53% of the available parking will be made available for public benefit. Phase 1 does have 38 stalls, but as I think Court described, this is or maybe it was Danny, I can't remember, but the initial 15 that's coming through the state transportation dollars is an infusion into a $75 million garage. So the garage is still largely and heavily on our shoulders. We're paying for it from tax increment. We're paying for it from a long-term lease we expect to have with the Utah Jazz, and then we have at-large parking as well. And so so that parking garage is a critical piece of what I believe is infrastructure missing from the west side. When the Jazz built their arena 26, 27 years ago, there were pieces like that that were missing. This is a chance to rectify and bring some of that environment in that you see in other communities. And that's how we see our project.
Thank you very much, Board Member Johnston.
Yeah, I think this will be a discussion going forward, but I'd be interested in hearing what the desire of the churches and those historic institutions, those buildings there are, and how they want to interact with the development. One of the things I appreciate about City Creek development itself, the underground parking, of course, and I agree, is also the sight lines and trying to take the older buildings around that block and open up sight lines through the block towards them. I'd be intrigued to hear what the churches feel about that, because there's one across the street on First, as well as the one adjacent to you. The second piece that's a design question for you all, and as we go forward. The second piece is the interaction with the high-rise senior housing next door, which seems to be cut off at this point. And I don't know what their desires are, or your constraints, obviously, in mid-block development, but it appears it's cut off from sort of your mid-block sort of movement. And I'm wondering if those residents or that structure could be integrated in some different way, rather than sort of cordoned off and have to go around the block to get in.
You bet, right.
So.
That's a great point. Right now there's an elevation change. This green area right here is a linear park. And I don't have the civil like in front of it. I know there's a grade change there that requires a retaining wall along here, and then it'll recede and then even out as you get to this level here. But that is something we could look at, because that's a good idea, is to try to incorporate that into it.
Yeah, I bring that up because you've got a very old historic structure, a house on
right here,
right on the edge there, the historic temple there, and then across the street the old Christian church, which are all old structures, well, relatively. And it'd be a shame to sort of cordon them off in courtyards kind of thing away from the rest of your development. I don't know the logistics of how you do that, so I don't claim to know how to figure that out.
Yeah.
But for me, that would be an important part of making this work in a community.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that this here could be figured out. We have this area back here. We could figure out a stair system or something to get back to them. It's interesting.
I know Board Member Mendenhall has a question. Is that correct?
Yeah. Thank you. And I wanted to second Charlie's comments on this. I really appreciate this discussion that we're able to have. I know that it's just the very beginning of what will be many discussions to come. And I hope that you will take to heart our desire that both that the Japanese community and all of the communities that are on First South that would be impacted by a development like this that y'all sharpen your pencils together more. And I want to say that I expect that the next time, not in today's this afternoon's meeting, but the next time we come back together to talk, that this board is able to hear some concise requests and considerations. Whether or not they're solidified, I understand that takes time, but I'd like to hear that there's more exploration happening to support and complement. Certainly, this is, you have to take care of your trash. You need to have a driveway. You have the right to do so. I understand that, and but I think that there's more collaboration that could happen to complement support. Frankly, I'd rather have dinner on a patio on that inward corner than out on the west-facing side on the busy street. I think that there's, not that you're going to change your development, but I think that there's a lot of complementary activity that could happen that would be attractive to people, that would provide a view of these historic buildings and more of a community feel than the arena. So anyway, please come back to us, and please work together more to come up with some requests that we can support, I hope. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. I'd like to jump in. There's a lot that has been floating around here. And while we've got Carlton here, I'd like to bring up a conversation that I had with Erin Litvak a couple months ago about this. And she mentioned to me something about the county looking at creation of a community center with one of those historic buildings on the corner of 1st and 3rd West. Can you talk to me about that?
I actually can't, only because wouldn't be in my actual purview or my department. I know that there has long since been an interest, though, by the county to try to find some better solutions to a cultural sort of placemaking on First South. We respect the fact that it's a city street, but I can tell you that I have access to transportation funds, and there are elements I think we could do on First South and collaboration and improve that. But on the cultural center, I'm not aware if there's an immediate plan at place. I know that we've long hoped that something could happen at the Struve building.
Fair enough. That being said, I want to shift to Ryan really quick and appreciate, at least, the current efforts that you've made so far to mitigate some of the issues that will present First South and Japantown. And I think it's just important to be clear that there's a difference between mitigation and enhancing a community. And so I would echo Charlie's request to continue your dialogue with the Japanese community. And maybe there's an opportunity for enhancement of Japantown beyond just the mitigating factors that you've already incorporated. I don't know what that looks like, but it's always worth the continuing dialogue, and I would request that you continue to do that. My question for you, my second question is on the phasing of this project. There has been no date identified for phase 2, which is the lion's share of the project itself. And I know that that's just kind of how development rolls. But what, if the city is looking at spending $15 million of the public resources, I think it would probably be a fair question to dig into that timeline a little bit more and find out, a little bit more about what you're anticipating, where your financing is at, what things need to be met in order for you to move forward on phase 2. And I would ask the RDA staff if there's anything you think we should do as a board in approving this to tie development metrics to the funding. So I guess let me just ask Ryan quickly, phasing, and then Danny, if you can jump in afterward.
All right, so phase 1, as you all know, I think is Block A and Block B. That's going to be built in one phase because we share a garage, 2-level garage. One of the biggest factor on the phasing plan is that everyone, I'm sure you'll recall, this building here that sits currently is the Royalwood office building, and in the ground floor of that building is the downtown post office. Everyone is very familiar with that. They need time when we give them notice to find time to find a new location or relocate. So our agreement with them, our current lease with them is that while we're building phase 1, when we are 2 years out from wanting this land, then we'll give them a 2-year notice, and that will give them a chance to go find something to replace that with, okay? Our phasing plan, as long as the markets continue as they are, and we can see that there's a chance, you know, construction costs are going crazy, but that's, you know, that's our job to figure out how to get those costs in line. Phase 2 would start, on our timeline right now, we would notice, we expect to notice the post office somewhere within the first year when we're under construction, which would give us a chance to be about 6 months to a year after completion. Phase 1 will be 26 months, and we would expect to start Phase 2 within 3 years after we start Phase 1, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And then Phase 2 will be multi-phase. You see Block C here. The garage we built in 1 because it's a below-grade garage. Then Block C would come online first, and then Block D would be, Block D is the most complicated. It has the 3 towers on top of it, and so it has a little more timeline. So that's why we put together, you know, we believe it's a 6 to 8 year project with all the different phasing that happens with there. So
Thank you.
And
Danny.
then to answer your question, I wanted to first go back to your first point, which was on the enhancements, because as we've been told, this project has gotten plan development approval. And so as we talk about any enhancements to the project in terms of considerations and working with the community, I think those need to be taken into account too, and kept in mind that the project has received that approval. And so anything we do over and above that needs to be within the context of the RDA and tied probably to those specific incentives, not necessarily tied to a city process. As far as the phasing goes and the project in general, if we get to the point where we're negotiating a reimbursement agreement with the developer, those are performance-based, and so they are factored into, one, when the project is done, and to what extent it generates increment, and so the life of the project area becomes a consideration for the amount of increment that they ultimately receive, as well as when the timing of the project coming online and the value of the project and the development in general. So to a certain extent, they are motivated to build faster and at a higher value so that they can receive the increment. Beyond that, you obviously are within your purview as an RDA board to direct staff if you wanted to include in that reimbursement or the terms additional milestones that they would need to hit, whether that be timing or phasing or values or the type of project.
Jennifer Bruno.
It is just a point of clarification that maybe either the county or the RDA could help clarify is the way we understand the setup of the financing to be as of now is that the first 15 million would not necessarily be post performance. It would be sort of as increment comes in, the RDA would be committing that increment to the county to pay, to meet up to the 15 million. I've been accused in the past of being a pessimist, and so let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the economy, didn't perform as we expect, and the increment didn't come in. The county, would essentially be sort of holding the responsibility for that, but the RDA wouldn't necessarily have the increment to pay the developer to complete phases, 2.5 of the project. So. I think it's in everyone's interest for the project to perform, but I just wanted to understand that nuance of the agreement with the county would mean that you're paying the interlocal, or you're paying the increment to the county first, and then any additional goes to the developer. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think that's an important clarification to make, that yes, the county's 15 million would be an upfront infusion of cash into the project, which would then be reimbursed as increments available. It would have the top priority of increment. And then to the extent that the developer potentially is also seeking an RDA loan, that would also be an upfront infusion of cash into the project, subject to normal loan repayment terms. So,
and I would just add, so our protection long term is that we're using existing tax resources, or I should say UDOT is, to pay our obligation to the state infrastructure bond. So what it would preclude us from doing is being able to invest in projects going forward.
Board Member Mendenhall.
Is there a way for us to contemplate a greater assurance that should our forecasts of increment not fulfill our desires and needs there, that the county and the city could contemplate a way for the future phases of the development that were reliant on our repayment of the 15 to continue?
I think the current, correct me if I'm wrong, Danny, but the current interlocal takes into account the provision that we're not looking beyond whatever the project is generating.
correct.
Can you talk to Jennifer about that? Sure. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to check out there. Did you get your question answered, board member? Okay. Anything else, board members? Yes. Yes? Charlie, if you have a question, you may consider asking staff. Danny?
Yes, I do. So I'm really struggling with this because I love the idea, and I've been wanting this block to be developed for a while. At the same time, I'm also very sympathetic to the community and the history that is there, and the way that much of the development up to this point has not taken that community into account and has really been detrimental. I'm very concerned about doing anything else that is going to further that treatment of the community. It really bothers me. It has bothered me a long time. I think this goes, obviously this is back before any of us. It was back before Carlton was at the county. It was back before Carlton was on the council. So there is a long history of the impact to the community. The question, I guess, for the county, if we were to adopt just the resolution of preparing the draft of the community, the CRA, as well as the public benefits analysis, but we held off on the resolution for the interlocal, what would that do to the project? What would that do to your financing? So I guess it's a question to RDA, the county, and the developer.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think what it would do to the project is, I'll let the developer answer that particular question. I guess it depends on what your time frame is and what the delay time frame. If you're talking a month or 6 weeks or something, we could certainly be patient with you. I think we'll start having communities interested. If for some reason the city is not, but we know that at least our understanding is that the developer's at a design point where they've got to make some decisions, and frankly, the 15 million is at least an initial commitment that that there is interest in their more enhanced project.
Okay. Yeah.
You want to go first? Go for it. Okay. From our perspective, we haven't had a chance to. I think you've seen what we call the but-for site plan as well. That can work for us. And that's something that we can keep those under. We have to go through design review process. When we do a design site plan review, when we go get all these enhancements to our building, we're trying to build beautiful buildings. We're trying to put something that was going to be a legacy project. It's going to change what it might be hubris in us, but we think this is one of the top 2 or 3 projects that Salt Lake's seen, has the potential to be that. And you're going to do it with private financing this time, private folks. But we are at a point we have to make a decision. There are financing reasons. Hotels, as you're watching interest rates increase, they're becoming more and more difficult to finance. And we have a lender that's done. My partner's actually here with us here, and they've probably, I'm going to guess, they've done over $250 million worth of projects with that lender. And that lender's ready to go. They have an allocation set for this year. The pressure, which was alluded to before, is we don't want to lose that allocation. It's very difficult. And so we're waiting for, we're looking for finality and a chance to move this project ahead. We've taken a few months to say, to study this out, and now we're at a point we have to move it forward. I wouldn't say we're happy to move forward with the other project, but we will if that's going to give us the surest sense of getting something done. We've been involved in the project for 2.5 years now, almost 3 years. And we need to move the project forward. Now, we're excited about this because we live here. We're multi-generation from the state of Utah, and we want to see the capital city enhanced and grow and to see kind of its future come to life. We think this is a chance that won't come around again. We developed this block. It'll take 40 more years before there's a chance to do what we want to do now. And that's why we really want to go after this now. So timing-wise, if we wait a month or two, I think we'll move ahead.
Okay.
We'd have to move ahead.
So if we were to put this on or put this off a month?
A month or two would really, yeah, our design team is on.
Yeah.
We've told them today's the day. If we get a good vote today, we're going to cut them loose tomorrow and start designing the project. If we don't, then we're going to.
Charlie, what would your, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but can you clarify why you're looking to?
Yeah, what I would like to do, and again, I want to see if I don't want a deal breaker at all, but I think that what I would really like to see is that there is at least one more shot at real collaboration with the community. And so what I'd like to do is, what I'd like to do is delay the interlocal piece until next month, but during that month, that we would have the developer, that we would have representatives from Japantown, and we would have the county work to resolve, or potentially resolve some of the different issues, just to see if we can take one more run at it. I don't want to delay it longer than that, but I do think that it's and to have RDA staff involved as well, because if there is a way to facilitate this so that we're not impacting that community as negatively as they believe, that's what I'd like to see.
Carlton.
I mean, I probably am too bold to make a suggestion, but you still hold the ultimate trump card in that you don't have the participation agreement and the final creation of the project area. And so I just wonder if you were to consider moving forward today, there's a lot of motivation, I think, on all the parties' part to find a resolution, because we know that ultimately you have some other longer standing decisions to make at the conclusion.
So we could move forward today, but get the commitment from the developer, the county, and RDA staff to engage over the next month, because we will, like Carlton said, this is not our final hit at it.
Mr. Chair, can I think Charlie and I seem to feel the same way about the desire to come up with greater solutions for the communities that are at stake here. And I do think that this isn't our final opportunity to impress that importance. So I want to say I would be comfortable with us moving ahead with this today, being clear that the condition of the next step in this process is based upon coming to a consensus that this board would be very comfortable supporting with the community, but let's discuss.
Okay. All right, I will withdraw my question, but I really would encourage all parties, including the county, to have some real discussion before this moves forward. And all the representatives from Japantown who are here, I don't fully expect you to be happy with, with whatever, the outcome is. I think that at this point it's that's just an unfortunate reality, but I do think that it is important that the developer, that the county, and the city work better with your community than we have in the past. And so I will reluctantly support moving forward with both items today, but my personal condition is that I'm going to be watching closely how that interaction takes place with the Japantown community, and if it doesn't improve, or if things don't get better, and again, I'm not expecting everyone in Japantown to be fully comfortable with with where things end up, but the process needs to be a heck of a lot better than I think it has up to this point, and so I'm going to be looking at those discussions, and will base any future consideration of action that I take on how those communications progress.
Thank you, Charlie. James.
I was just going to say, I think that the Ritchie Group, Mr. Ritchie, understands how important it is for us to have that collaboration moving forward. So, and we do have that trump card, which I think is really important to make sure that those who are coming from Japantown can see that it is important to the council, that it has been a priority. And, not to put age on Carlton, but that was 21 years ago now, right, Carlton? So
True.
So I will be in support of that moving forward for that motion, just because I understand that we do hold that card and that we can exercise that.
Amy Fowler.
Yeah, I just first want to thank Charlie for asking the question because I appreciated it. Part of our RDA process is the public benefits analysis that is so incredibly important to us as a board and how we look at then, and going back to Carlton's trump card, can we have a different term for that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, please do.
But that as we go, should we go forward with any sort of, this doesn't bind us. That's the other important part. This isn't binding us, but we do want to say that everybody in this room that has voiced an opinion is important, and this development is important, but how it relates with our communities surrounding it is important. But nothing is binding here, but we do get to create and show that we want this collaboration to move forward. And really, I think out of all of, on our board, what I've seen is that a lot of times that tax increment, that interlocal kind of comes down to that public benefit analysis and how much that is really supporting the communities around it. So I'm telling you this up front because that's what we really, at least I do, really look towards that as we're looking at what that tax increment looks like as we move forward down the process of the RDA line. So just as more incentive to sort of make sure that we're all collaborating on that side, right? So, and thanks for the discussions.
Okay, I'm willing to entertain a motion, Board Member Mendenhall.
Well, I have some conditions on the motion. Of course. I'm sorry, do we have a motion sheet that you want me to read off of, or should I just wing it?
On the back of this sheet.
At the back of the sheet or the bottom of the staff report, the end of the staff report.
Okay, there's some items in the policy questions that I'd like to incorporate into our motion here. And I'll number them for you. And it's policy question 1, 11, and 13. And to my peers, if there's others that you'd like to include here, so please speak up. My motion would be that I think I'll add the language in at the beginning, or would you rather me do it at the
No,
end?
either way, just
Okay.
if you could read it for the record, because we don't have this in the electronic packets yet.
Okay. I move that the board adopt both resolutions, which would authorize participation of the draft CRA plan and approve the interlocal agreement with the county. In addition, that the staff work with the applicant to explore a commitment to include a certain number of affordable units in the project. And perhaps, Jennifer, you might be telling me now is not the time to do this, but I'm going to make this motion anyway. In addition, that the RDA staff conduct an analysis of when the central business district would reach the minimum tax increment target with and without removing Block 67 from the CBD. And in addition, that the administration produce a cost-benefit analysis to determine whether increased economic activity experienced from the project will be sufficient to replace the $40,528 currently generated from the city block, and when. And then there were some clarifications on that first part of the motion, that the interlocal be amended to include language requiring the developer to provide timely information so that the administration can fulfill the conditions precedent to the transfer of the funds from Salt Lake County, which is Section 2 of the interlocal, and also that the adoption of this interlocal agreement in no way commits the RDA Board or Salt Lake City Council to future approvals or action.
Thank you, Board Member Mendenhall. Is there anybody that would like to amend?
Or second?
Second? Stay silent,
Can I speak to it
please.
before it dies?
Could you attach the numbers as well to the sections that you added?
1.
13 was in there.
1,
1,
11, and
11.
13.
1, 11,
So
13?
I'm trying to ask to initiate, if they haven't initiated already, discussions about the inclusion of affordable housing in your housing components. That's, I don't need to talk about how critical that is to this city and our body particularly. The other part is to conduct financial analysis about when we'd fulfill the tax increment needs here that we could be committing ourselves to, and that currently we generate about $40,000 from that block within the CBD, and with the potential removal of it from the CBD, I'm asking for an analysis that would help us understand when we would be able to fill that hole.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Board Member Johnston? Okay. Well, in that case, I would like, before we act on this motion, I think it's important that we articulate for the developer, for the county, and for RDA staff what we are expecting in their collaboration with the Japanese community and what we'll be looking for. Can we do that now?
Before we do that, can I ask Danny if you have any issues with the very long motion that I made? Or that if perhaps some of them might be better addressed at a different part of our discussion?
No, I think we can respond to all of those. I think the question of the number of affordable units and analysis of that, we'll have that discussion with the developer.
Right.
We've had those conversations briefly, but we will certainly come back to you either with possibilities within this development and or what the opportunities are as part of the overall project area creation.
Thank you.
With all of that, I think we're good.
And I think we said this before, but this would be an exception to current policy. And I'm okay with current, as far as CRA creation within this existing CDB district. I'm okay with exceptions as long as we can justify them and say why this is the exception of the 10 to 15% of the time versus why this shouldn't be the norm. I think we need that as you go through your analysis going forward, at least from my end of things, to make sure that we are, if the policy's bad, we need to know that. If the policy's sound, why is this an exception that we can rely on going forward? Because there's no reason I can't see why other developers wouldn't want this as well. We still have some infill around the city. So be clear on our end that we're being consistent here for very specific reasons.
And I would just say briefly on that, not to get into details, it's not necessarily an exception of our current policy, because our current policy is geared specifically towards single property economic development driven project areas. We don't have a policy on this, and I think to your point, we would come back to you with a draft of a policy.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'd actually like for us to vote on this motion, and then we can provide clarity with the Japantown question afterward. So if you are in favor of the motion as it was worded by Board Member Mendenhall, give me a thumbs up. 6 in favor. And Board Member Wharton, not here, absent. So, does that help? Okay. All right. Now, I think it'd be helpful if we could, board members, the Japantown question has come up a number of times. I'm going to ask Charlie, I'm going to ask Aaron, and I'm going to ask Board Member Fowler to jump in on this and help provide a little bit of clarity and reiterate exactly what we will be looking for when the subject comes back before us. What kinds of things are you hoping to accomplish with this collaboration with the Japanese community?
Sure. So what I'd like to do is just have RDA staff facilitate the discussion. I would like to have the county, represent either Carlton. If Carlton can't be there, then actually if Carlton could be there, I think that would be helpful. Just because you have just your institutional knowledge on a lot of this would be helpful. The Japantown community, whoever y'all designate to to work, and then the developer, your team, and really what I'm looking for is not like a wholesale redesign of the block. That's not realistic, and I don't think anyone expects that. But if there are things that could be done that could enhance the area, directly across from Japantown, that's really what I'm looking for. Just some active discussion, some creativity to see if there are some options that can be looked at that will not completely, tank the design work that's already been done. That said, I don't want to have that as an excuse. I don't want to say, well, we've already done so much, and anything else is going to make it fall apart. As you said, anything can be done. The question is, how badly we all want to do it. And so I really want to have this group go into this discussion with open minds and with a meaningful desire to come up with something that's more collaborative.
Thank you, Charlie. Aaron, anything to add?
And another thing.
Go ahead.
To come up with a plan to end, or to create peace in the Middle East. If you all can do that, since we're adding all these crazy things on here.
We've already done that.
No, I do understand, to the developer that this is a big ask, but I fully expect that we can come up with something that is a win-win for everybody.
Thank you, Charlie. Aaron.
I have 5 words.
Okay.
Because I don't want to say what you're going to come up with. I think if you could come up with something that supports, respects, complements, recognizes, and integrates. Support is broad, too. I mean, there's financial, there's a million ways to support something. That's my request. So I hope when you come back, I can look at my list of 5 words and feel like you found a way.
Is that an acronym?
I'll rearrange them and come up with one.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Anything else from board members? Okay. All right. Thank you all. I'd like to actually toss the time to Jennifer Bruno really quick, just for point of clarification.
Yeah, just for the recorder's purposes and for the purposes of minutes, the vote on the motion made by Board Member Mendenhall was 6 yes votes. Board Member Wharton absent. The yes votes were Board Members Johnston, Mendenhall, Fowler, Kitchen, Luke, and Rogers. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Okay, team, we are moving along. We're going to skip number C5, item C5. That is not an urgent issue, and we ran out of time with our Block 67 discussion, so we will bump that to a future conversation. Are there any announcements from the Executive Director, Danny?
Just real quick, if I may.
Please.
Our notice of funding availability is on the street. That's the $10 million that this board issued. We have a meeting tomorrow with the developers for informational, and the applications are due by the 31st. We are deep in the process of relocating tenants at the Overnighter. We have a success story from a woman and her son who were doubled up in one of the rooms there. They have found permanent housing, and they have reached back out to us and told us how extremely grateful they are for that.
So how far into the time frame are you for the relocation?
We are hoping to wrap it up by the end of this month. We have 1 or 2 tenants, though, that are a little problematic to find them permanent housing, but that's our goal, is to wrap it up by the end of July.
Okay.
Then other than that, we had 2 staff members start. JP Coates, who comes to us from the planning department, where he's been for the past 3 years. I think he's behind me. And then we have...
Can we get Jake to raise your hand, stand up, make yourself known?
Here. Hopefully he's away. He dressed up today, so I wanted to make sure we call him out.
Welcome
and then
to the IDA.
Robin Smith, our administrative assistant, started yesterday. I don't think she's here because she's been in orientation all day. So
I see.
That's all we have, unless there are any questions or requests for updates beyond that.
Will you bring Robin next month? So
Yes,
we can
we'll
meet
subject her to it.
Okay,
next month.
great. Any additional updates from anybody on staff? I assume not. Nothing from me. You, do you have anything to offer, Vice Chair? Nope. Okay. In that case, we are done with our meeting today.
Thank
so
you.
Thanks for showing up and engaging with us. Until next time. And Board Member Fowler, or excuse me, Mendenhall, when would you like to start the council meeting?
Folks, would it be too fast to say 10 minutes? So we start at 4:30? Tomorrow? 6. Okay, do you need more time? I know you're going to take more time. Let's be back here at 4:40, and gives us 20 minutes, okay?
All right, council meeting starting at 4:40.